Antonio came to the first class of seminary along with his son Esley. They were very quiet, really difficult to get to know. He had a small church in the city near the seminary. He was serving without much distinction. His congregation was relatively weak and poor. His experience in the seminary was a life-changing experience by his own testimony. He invited me to come out to preach to his congregation. I got to know his people. I've been there several times since, but the first time I went, I encountered an anemic church with a wonderful man as its pastor, a pastor's wife, a pastor's son, their daughters, people of faith. But the methodology that they had employed in their church had been negligibly successful. I went back after he finished seminary and preached, and by the testimony of the people in his church, their ministry had radically changed. They spoke of their pastor as before Seminario Wesleyano de Venezuela and after the seminary. Such a radical change in his ministry because of what he learned in the seminary, not only authentic faith and Wesleyan theology, what he learned about Bible study and prayer and service, but what he learned about how to be an effective church transforming lives was radically impacted by his experience in the seminary. He was smart enough to take what he learned in the seminary and apply it in his church. Well, his church started to grow. They grew rapidly. It's now a very large church where his son is the associate pastor and youth minister. I had the privilege of performing the ceremony along with Dan Dunn for Esley and his bride, and they now have their first child. And it's a joy for me to know this family and see how God has worked in their lives over the last 12 or 14 years through their involvement with the Seminario Wesleyano de Venezuela. I will tell you this story. The last time I was in Antonio's house, he and his wife served dinner to Jane and me. And the young girl serving the meal, acting as the servant, I recognized as someone I knew from the church, but I didn't quite know who she was. After the meal was completed, the pastor called her over and said, "This is our daughter." And I realized that the last time I had seen her, she had been a preteen, and she had blossomed into young womanhood and was really a beautiful young girl. And I didn't recognize her as the young, spindly preteen I'd known before. He said, "Tell Pastor Warren," that's what they called me there, "tell Pastor Warren what happened to you." And she told me how that her leg had always been short. And I remembered then that this is the pastor's daughter who had a deformed leg. It was a couple of inches at least shorter than the other leg, and she wore a built-up shoe, and she had a significant limp. And she said, "God healed my leg." And she got and walked around. I realized I hadn't noticed her limping. She got and walked around, and she gave God the glory for this change. And her father said they were having a prayer meeting in the church, and he felt impressed simply to pray for her again. Of course, he'd prayed for her since she was born with this deformity. Nothing had happened. He said, this time God said, "You need to pray." He said, so the congregation gathered around her, the leaders in the congregation. We laid hands on her, anointed her with oil, and prayed. And he said, instantaneously, the leg grew, and now they're of equal length. And he said, "Show him again." She stood up and walked, and she said, "Glory to God. Give God the glory." And I've seen shysters do this kind of thing with sleight of hand, but I knew this girl. She walked with a limp, significant limp. She no longer does. God has healed her. That's the kind of thing God is doing in the church in Venezuela.